Plastic is supposed to be eternal, but in Burkina Faso, it is becoming the soil of a new future. For decades, bottles have floated on rivers, poisoned farmland, and piled into mountains of waste. Children grew up surrounded not by books but by rubbish. Entire villages lived without safe roofs, without light, without hope. Then came a man who refused to look away. Ibrahim Traoré walked the riverbanks and saw what others had abandoned. Where the world saw decay, he saw foundations. Where others saw poison, he saw possibility. One single idea rose, that every discarded bottle could be a seed of dignity. This is not just about recycling. It is about rewriting the story of a nation once dismissed as poor and powerless. Imagine homes standing strong against storms, classrooms filled with light, and clinics no longer ruled by darkness, all built from what the world had thrown away. Do not leave. What comes next may change how you see both waste and Africa's destiny. Subscribe, stay with us, and witness a story of sovereignty in the making. In Ouagadougou, the capital of Burkina Faso, the streets themselves became rivers of plastic. After every market day, traders packed up their stalls, but the bottles remained. Thousands upon thousands, scattered like a curse no one could lift. In the villages, streams clogged with floating waste, fields cracked under poisoned soil, and farmers whispered of crops that no longer grew as they once had. This was not just an environmental problem. It was a human tragedy. Families huddled under straw huts that could not withstand a single storm. Children bent their backs to write on bare ground beneath trees, their lessons scattered by wind and rain. Hospitals flickered without power, nurses forced to hold torches in their mouths while women gave birth in the shadows. Poverty and pollution had fused into a cycle that seemed unbreakable. And yet on the riverbanks, Ibrahim Traoré refused to spare. He bent down to lift a bottle, not as trash, but as possibility. What if this object, light, fragile, despised, could be repurposed into strength? What if the very symbol of decay became the backbone of dignity? The idea was radical in its simplicity. Each bottle would be filled with sand or soil, sealed tightly, and pressed until it became what he called an eco-brick, a unit as firm as stone, but cheaper and more abundant than any imported block. Gather millions of bottles, bind them with mortar, and the walls they formed could stand as strong as concrete. The first demonstration house looked modest. Just 2 rooms, a simple roof, plaster smoothed over colored bottles hidden beneath. But when villagers approached, they touched the walls with awe. This was no ordinary dwelling. It was a miracle born of waste. Mothers walked through its doorway with relief, whispering that their children would finally sleep dry. Fathers stood straighter, pointing to the walls and declaring, "We built this with our own hands, with bottles the world had abandoned." Soon entire villages joined the effort. Men and women scoured riverbanks, children ran through alleys gathering bottles, and teams worked tirelessly to wash, dry, and fill each one with sand. A rhythm emerged, the rhythm of dignity returning. For every 20,000 bottles, a family found shelter. For every wall erected, a community discovered its strength. The image of waste transformed into walls spread like wildfire. Local newspapers dubbed it the House of Plastic, and villagers began to speak of their homes not as huts, but as fortresses of pride. Schools followed. Where children once sat beneath trees, new classrooms rose from bottle bricks. They were strong enough to endure storms, cool enough to shield against the hell heat, and bright enough to remind students that knowledge deserved a proper roof. Each wall built from discarded bottles carried a message. What the world throws away, Burkina Faso can raise into dignity. But this was only the beginning. If bottles could become houses, what else could they become? Could trash light the night, fuel the village, or even heal the earth itself? The answer to that question would take the story beyond bricks, into fire, fuel, and light. The first time children stepped into a classroom built entirely from bottles, the air itself seemed to change. They ran their hands along the plaster, tracing the hidden shapes of the eco-bricks beneath. Some laughed, others stared in disbelief. For them, it was not just shelter. It was a revelation that waste could hold their future, that their education no longer had to bow before the storm. Parents wept quietly at the doorway. For years, they had sent their sons and daughters to learn under trees, only to watch books soak in the rain, chalk scatter in the wind, and dreams dissolve with every passing season. Now, for the first time, they saw walls that could withstand the fury of the sky. They saw roofs that promised safety. They saw hope written not on paper, but in plastic. In the dusty courtyard of a village clinic, another miracle unfolded. Small generators powered by recycled biofuel began to hum. At dusk, the lamps flickered on. For the first time, the delivery room glowed with steady light. A nurse who had long balanced torches between her teeth while helping women give birth now stood beneath an electric lamp. Tears streamed down her face as she whispered, "Tonight, I have light." These were moments that transformed dignity into something tangible. No policy, no speech, no foreign aid had ever produced such immediate change. A house that shielded children from storms, a classroom that honored their right to learn, a lamp that guided a newborn into life. The ripples spread through every corner of the community. Young men who had once loitered in markets without purpose now lined up to collect bottles. Their hands grew rough with work, but their voices carried new pride. Women formed cooperatives, washing bottles, filling them with sand, and stacking them into eco-bricks. Together they sang as they worked, reviving the old rhythms of labor once thought lost to despair. With every wall raised, a new confidence was born. Villagers began to say that the project was not just about houses, it was about identity. It reminded them that they were not helpless recipients of aid, but architects of their own destiny. The media within Burkina Faso caught the fire. Local newspapers declared it the green revolution of plastic. Radio stations carried stories of families who felt they were living in a new age. Photos of brightly colored bottle houses spread across social networks. Young people proudly shared images of the homes they had built, declaring themselves pioneers of an African experiment. But the deepest reaction came in the words of ordinary people. A mother who once carried her child into a leaking hut now whispered, "We sleep without fear." A father who once feared his son would grow into anger and violence now said, "My boy carries bricks, not guns." Teachers who had watched their pupils scatter during storms now smiled as lessons continued under solid roofs. In these testimonies lay the heart of the transformation. Plastic had ceased to be rubbish. It had become rhythm, dignity, and revolution. Yet even as applause filled village courtyards and headlines celebrated the miracle, murmurs of unease began to surface. Not everyone welcomed this new order. For every mother who rejoiced, there were elites who questioned. For every father who built, there were companies who feared. The story, still fragile, was about to step beyond the villages and into the arena of politics and power. And with that step, the echoes of pride would collide with the whispers of resistance. The impact of the bottle revolution did not remain confined to walls and classrooms. It seeped into the very fabric of society. In towns and villages where despair had long been the only inheritance, people began to discover a new identity, one built not on what they lacked, but on what they could create. Jobs appeared where once there had been only idleness. For every house erected from 20,000 bottles, dozens of hands found steady work. Men combed the riverbanks, gathering waste with pride. Women, once excluded from formal labor, formed cooperatives that transformed plastic into eco-bricks for sale. Even the youth, those most tempted by migration or militias, now carried shovels, buckets, and bricks instead of weapons. A father said with relief, "My son no longer dreams of leaving, he dreams of building." The transformation touched health as well. With less plastic burned in open pits, the air grew cleaner. Children coughed less at night. Fewer mosquitoes bred in clogged waterways, lowering the threat of disease. By replacing firewood with biofuel, families no longer had to walk miles to cut trees, sparing lungs from smoke and forests from destruction. Farmers began to notice that rains returned more regularly. The soil held more moisture, and the land itself seemed to breathe again. But perhaps the greatest change was political. In a country long labeled dependent on foreign aid, villagers building their own homes from their own waste became a living declaration of sovereignty. It was dignity laid brick by brick. Politicians in Ouagadougou noticed. Some hailed it as proof that Burkina Faso could solve its problems without waiting for donors. Others, however, saw a threat. If communities could build without contractors, what power remained for elites who had profited from dependency? The project carried symbolism that extended far beyond construction. Just as the plastic bottle was redefined from garbage into foundation, so too was the nation redefining itself. Some compared the environmental transformation to the political upheaval that had shaken the state. They spoke of it as the social counterpart to the Ibrahim Traoré coup. Both acts of defiance against dependency, both expressions of a people reclaiming control over their future. This comparison spread quickly. To the ordinary farmer stacking bottle walls, it did not matter whether the change came through politics or through plastic. What mattered was the rediscovery of pride. To the young laborer earning his first wage from collecting bottles, It was a sign that Burkina Faso no longer had to be defined by poverty alone. And to elders who had feared their children would vanish into militias or migrant boats, it was a relief to see them stay, build, and belong. Yet the new reality unsettled entrenched interests. Cement companies reliant on imports watched their market shrink. Bureaucrats demanded regulations and permits, raising obstacles that threatened to slow the spread of bottle construction. Whispers emerged that elites feared losing influence if communities became too self-reliant. What began as an environmental project was turning into a political statement. Still, among ordinary citizens, the message was unmistakable. Plastic was no longer waste. It was work, it was survival, it was dignity. A nurse in a rural clinic summed it up simply: "We do not beg for solutions. We build them. But with every revolution comes resistance. With every assertion of sovereignty comes scrutiny." The question now was not whether Burkina Faso could build with bottles. The question was how the world beyond its borders would respond. And as whispers turned into debates in foreign capitals, the gaze of the international community began to focus on Ouagadougou. The story of bottle houses did not remain in Burkina Faso's villages. It traveled across borders, carried by journalists, amplified by social media, and echoed in diplomatic halls. Soon the world's gaze fixed on a nation once considered invisible. The first to acknowledge it was the United Nations Environment Program. Delegates visiting Ouagadougou described the initiative as a unique pilot of circular economy in West Africa. Their reports praised the ingenuity of communities turning waste into walls and fuel, recommending that neighboring Sahel states study the model. For the first time, the country was not cited as a case of poverty, but as a case of innovation. The African Union followed, calling it a Made in Africa solution. Leaders celebrated the fact that sovereignty could be expressed not only in parliaments or military barracks, but in the daily labor of villagers reclaiming control over their resources. For them, the plastic project was more than environmental policy. It was an affirmation of dignity. Europe, too, took notice. The European Union linked the initiative with its Green Climate Fund. Engineers from Germany and the Netherlands traveled to test the strength of bottle bricks, assessing whether they could be scaled for larger projects. European diplomats framed the effort as a grassroots example of climate action, eager to showcase it in international forums. The United States, however, sent mixed signals. Through the Young African Leaders Initiative, Washington hailed Ibrahim Traoré as a symbol of youth innovation. American universities expressed interest in research partnerships, eager to study recycling technologies born in the Sahel. Yet oil companies in Houston and New York eyed the rise of plastic biofuel with unease. If poor nations could transform their waste into energy, would they remain dependent on imported fossil fuels? Global media magnified the narrative. BBC, Al Jazeera, and France 24 produced documentaries that dubbed Ibrahim the plastic revolutionary. National Geographic devoted a feature to bottle houses, portraying them as icons of hope in the Sahel. Overnight, the country was no longer portrayed as weak, but as a laboratory of possibility. Yet with recognition came politics. Supporters celebrated it as the dawn of a Burkina Faso revolution in environmental thinking, a movement where Africa no longer waited for external aid, but wrote its own script. Critics, however, wondered whether this independence might unsettle relations with donors, shifting balances of power that had endured for decades. And so, while bottle houses stood firm in villages, their meaning was debated in boardrooms and foreign ministries. Was this the birth of a global model, or the spark of new tensions? The answer would depend not only on bottles and bricks, but on the courage to carry the vision forward. Every revolution faces a test, the moment when vision must confront reality. For the bottle houses of Burkina Faso, that moment is already here. The first challenge is infrastructure. Collecting millions of bottles from remote villages demands roads, trucks, and storage centers that the nation does not yet fully possess. Without organized supply chains, the project relies heavily on volunteers, their determination carrying the weight of what governments should provide. The second obstacle is regulation. While bottle houses have proven resilient, skeptics demand proof. Building codes, safety certifications, fire resistance tests, these are the hurdles that must be cleared before bottle construction can be recognized as more than an experiment. Without them, critics warn, the movement risks being dismissed as temporary or unsafe. Financing, too, looms large. Scaling small recycling plants into national grids will require investment far beyond local donations or modest grants. Banks, international funds, even private investors may be needed. Yet with their money may come strings, conditions that could dilute the independence that gave the project its power. And yet the opportunities shine brighter than the doubts. With every house completed and every generator lit, the idea spreads further. Neighboring countries whisper of adopting the model. NGOs speak of replication. Universities send researchers to study the eco-villages rising in the Sahel. What began as waste collection could become an exportable skill, a new industry born from rubbish. Tourism has already begun to stir. Curious travelers arrive to see entire streets lined with colorful bottle walls. Journalists and scholars walk among homes and classrooms, calling them living laboratories. If nurtured carefully, these eco-villages could draw not only attention, but foreign exchange, turning plastic into pride on a global stage. Most importantly, the project has changed psychology. A generation of Burkina no longer sees themselves as powerless. With every bottle filled, every wall raised, every lamp lit, they discover their capacity to build rather than beg. This mental shift is perhaps the most valuable foundation of all, for it lays the road to sovereignty not just in bricks, but in belief. That road is not paved with asphalt. It is paved with bottles, fragile shells that, when joined together, become unbreakable. It is a road leading towards a future where Africa does not wait, but chooses. And the final question remains, will the world walk this road alongside Burkina Faso, or watch from a distance as the nation builds its destiny, bottle by bottle? The story of Ibrahim Traoré is not just about plastic. It is about a nation reclaiming its dignity, one bottle at a time. What the world saw as worthless, Burkina Faso transformed into walls, classrooms, electricity, and hope. A bottle that once poisoned the soil now holds the weight of sovereignty. A fragment of waste has become a cornerstone of pride. Walk into the villages today, and you will see it with your own eyes. Mothers lay their children to rest beneath sturdy roofs built from 20,000 bottles. Fathers watch their sons earn wages not from migration or militias, but from building. Teachers welcome pupils into classrooms where storms cannot interrupt learning. Nurses deliver newborns under clean electric light. Forests breathe again as firewood consumption falls. Each wall, each lamp, each brick whispers the same message. Dignity can be built with bare hands. The symbolism has not been lost on the world. Commentators call it a Burkina Faso revolution, a movement where Africans write their own script of development. And within the country, people draw comparisons between the bottle houses and the Ibrahim Traoré coup. Both were born from frustration with dependency. Both declared that Burkina Faso would no longer wait for outsiders to dictate its future. Both showed that power is not only in speeches or armies, but in the daily work of ordinary people. For the villagers, these comparisons are not political debates. They are lived realities. When a farmer's field yields crops because the soil is free of plastic, when a child studies under electric light, when a community raises walls from what was once rubbish, these are revolutions more powerful than any decree. They are revolutions of pride, of creation, of sovereignty. The world now faces its own choice. If Burkina Faso can build a future from bottles, what excuse remains for nations drowning in waste? If a people once dismissed as poor and powerless can rise with their own hands, what stops the rest of us from doing the same? Stay with this story. Share it. Subscribe, because the revolution of dignity has only just begun, and the next chapter may yet be written in your own hands.